Well, welcome back to Kaleidoscope. Special guest today is Nan Michael's daughter, Sally from Atlanta.
Hi, Athens.
She used to call Athens home.
Yes.
6 years.
Back in the 80s. I'm an 80s girl.
Ah. Well, I want to share a wonderful thrift shop that benefits animals, New Beginnings. I got this beautiful bracelet for a ridiculous price, new glasses, a bag full of goodies. Today we are going to feature the memorial of Pete Hill, who died in his 90s, and as a Universalist life minister, married Sally's brother, Ian.
That's right. Yeah, that was back in the 90s.
Were you there?
I was there.
All right.
Yeah, it was at the chapel on campus.
Galbraith.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. It was a very beautiful ceremony.
Well, he was a member of the Currents community, and his widow, Marty Zinn, very active in the Appalachian Renewable Energy Economic Co-op, and Roger Wilkins, and a lot of local Peggy Gish. You'll see them all at a very touching memorial at the Currents, which ends with flinging his ashes over the hills.
To the wind, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I've seen it. You're in for a treat.
Are you the official videotaper that Marty Brzezinski? Have you ever met? He's an activist.
Video takes everything in the world. I don't know how she stores on Churchill is $10,000 a
That's where it's actually been already.
My stuff down in that. Like the music.
Brad is extremely progressive, very active. He spends more time in politics than he does running his business.
You must be Eve.
I am.
I just met your fiance earlier today for the first time. Sounds beautiful. I'm gonna take some pictures. It's the first time I've come down Select.
Well, either way, I don't care. I use that huge road.
I'm doing okay. Haven't Patty.
I don't remember the name, but are you on Facebook? You might have it. That's
We're celebrating these days, isn't it?
it is.
Sometimes I remember weird things like where I met them or some little aspect of their life that he told me about.
And you don't remember their name.
We do a pretty good job of maintaining human rights of our own citizens. The CIA violates them all over the world every day and has since 1947. How long is it going to be before the human rights violations the CIA practices all over the world, particularly in Central America, start coming right here to Ethiopia? General Pinochet may be down the road.
Right. We Americans are becoming more knowledgeable. We just know an awful lot more now about what is going on in the world. And so you take Reagan, who was a very popular president.
Style over substance.
Yeah, but his policies were not approved. To a very large extent, he wanted to do in dismantling the national forests, what he wanted to do with dismantling the life support system for people who were in really bad conditions, the way he wanted to deregulate business so that profits could multiply. So I think substantially the American population didn't agree with that. But he was such a conjurer that as a person, he was accepted and approved.
We're obviously here to celebrate the remarkable life of Pete Hill. Look at this amazing group of people, all these lives that he has touched, and we know there are hundreds more.
We're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here.
Pete, Jack Robbins Hill, 94 and a half years old, of Ames Township, Athens County, died peacefully at home under hospice care on June 13, 2017, of old age, after a long, interesting, and fulfilling life. Marty was by his side through his final hours. Pete was an intrepid, visionary, magnetic man who lived a life of love and friendship, service to the world, building and fixing things, traveling and meeting folks, and telling jokes. He was an inveterate tinkerer and loved boats. He couldn't pass by a garage sale, a junkyard, or curiosities of any kind. He wore flip-flops in the snow. If you walked with him for a while, you would see him speak and laugh with every human within range, and stop to look at insects and leaves and weather and machines. He would sit down next to a stranger and say, "So, what's your racket?" and engage in deep conversation. After the war, on the GI Bill, he studied wildlife management at the University of Connecticut, then completed a BSF degree in wildlife management at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. During this time, he met a beautiful artist and champion high diver, Alma Vandervelde. Just after their marriage in 1948, they were sent to the Micronesian island of Palau and worked 2 years to set up a scientific field station as a Pacific War memorial. When the project ran out of money, they returned to the University of Michigan, where Pete earned a master's degree and became a PhD candidate in plant ecology in 1955, but never completed his dissertation on the ecology of old fields. During this period, his daughter Victoria and son Brian were born. Pete and his family returned to the Trust Territories of Micronesia in 1955 to begin his career with the U.S. Department of the Interior. He worked in education on the island of Truk for 12 years, first as a science teacher, then a principal, and finally as district superintendent. His marriage ended when Alma moved with the children to Guam, where son Lance was born. In 1967, Pete moved to the Micronesian island of Pohnpei and worked as an advisor in community and economic development for 5 years, officially retiring in 1972. He liked to say it was catch-23 that brought him early retirement. He had achieved 20 years of government service, including his military duty. His advisor job was abolished, and he turned 50 years old, all in the same year. After 2 more years on Pohnpei, playing and unofficially advising, he returned to the mainland USA in 1974 because he felt his country needed him. Upon returning, Pete visited Community Service, a nonprofit organization in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where he was immediately hired for the next 2 years. While there, he became involved with both Movement for a New Society, MNS, a national network of nonviolent activists for social change, and re-evaluation co-counseling, a form of peer counseling for self-development. From there, he moved to Philadelphia, the headquarters for MNS, to link up with others who were interested in developing rural nonviolence communities. There he met Marty Zen, also involved in MNS, and they declared their marriage under Pennsylvania common law on June 21st, 1978. That summer, they visited friends who had relocated to Athens County, Ohio, and they too moved there 8 months later. They were delighted to find several other intentional communities already in the area, but ended up joining a group ready to start a new community based on cooperative principles. In 1981, the group formed a nonprofit which brought 163 acres in northern Ames Township and began developing Currents Community. Living in community in Athens County was Pete's cup of tea, as he put it. He enthusiastically applied his many skills working with others to develop community buildings, infrastructure, and gardens. He did plumbing, electrical and mechanical tasks, dug ditches and holes for water and sewage systems, and was a mason and a mower. In later years, he liked to say that he was a pathologist, a person who loved making and maintaining walking paths through the woods at Currents. Another project late in life was hand-hewing an 18-foot dugout canoe from a big poplar tree that was given to him by his old buddy and neighbor, Paul Linscott, from up on the ridge there. It wasn't only physical skills Pete had to offer. He also excelled in leading groups, facilitation and planning and so on, nonviolent action organizing and training, and interpersonal communications like active listening, mediation, and conflict resolution. He applied these skills both at Currents and in the wider Athens community. Pete could really listen. He was sought out for advice and solace. He made a point of sharing with young men the mistakes he had made in his first marriage and the lessons he had learned about communicating in relationships. Pete helped start a number of organizations whose purposes were to bolster community, protect the environment, improve the happiness and health of the peoples of the world, and to learn about and do the work of fixing injustice wherever he saw it. Among local groups he participated in were Save Our Rural Environment, Athens County Coalition Organized Against Long Walling, Central American Solidarity Committee, Appalachian Peace and Justice Network, Athens Area Mediation Service, People for Peace, Safe and Appropriate Forms of Energy, Ready Response Team, and others. He did many trainings in nonviolence and activist skills, not only locally but regionally in other Appalachian states. As a concerned and caring citizen, he attended federal Hocking school board meetings for many years, offering assistance when tensions arose. And he joined the Athens Vietnam Vets of America chapter to offer support to veterans younger than himself. As an ordained Universal Life Church minister, Pete became licensed by the state of Ohio to perform marriages, enabling him to conduct scores, if not hundreds, of local weddings. He also gained renown as an effective, unofficial counselor of couples having relationship troubles. Throughout his life, Pete enjoyed pretty good health. He had a total hip replacement at 65 and a quadruple bypass at 78, after which he had type 2 diabetes. And it was after all this that he built the dugout canoe. He slowed down as he neared the end of his 80s and began dealing with ongoing non-invasive bladder cancer. Shortly before his 90th birthday, he suffered from bradycardia and experienced some cognitive decline. In spite of these new limitations, Pete continued to enjoy life from his living room recliner, visiting with many friends and gazing out the front window at a most magnificent view, as he would put it, of bucolic scenery and varied wildlife. Throughout his life, persons of all ages were drawn to him and his good humor, intelligence, and curiosity. He had a big laugh and a big twinkly smile. He was a big man and will be missed in a big way. Thank you.
Pete Hill was the love of my life. I feel very lucky to have been his partner. We met in 1976 and got to know each other first just as housemates, living in a collective house in West Philadelphia. Early on in our acquaintance, I remember a conversation expressing that I would only marry a man who would absolutely adore me. He took the cue. And all of our life together, our 40 years, I always felt adored by him. We were a good team. Me, the planner and organizer, manager. Him, the skillful doer and whimsical playmate. We led separate lives a lot of the time. I was busy in various ways and he was busy in other ways, but we also had a lot of togetherness. We had no secrets, no jealousies, no lasting resentments. Struggles? Yes. We were very different types of people. Fights even, but never deep or enduring. It was a wonderful life with Pete. I will miss being Pete and Marty, who liked to meet and party. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, said he. I never died, said he. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die. Ever since Pete and Marty moved to Athens, we were part of every peace group that successively followed one another. When there was somebody who was being threatened or at risk or whatever, we were called upon to go there and just be a peaceful presence or accompany them. And one time we heard that there was going to be a KKK rally out on a farm along, I believe it was Route 329. Several carloads of us drove over there, parked further on away from the farm. We didn't want to be too intrusive. We didn't know what we were going to find, actually. And so we walked down the hill together, down the road, and then, sure enough, wasn't like a rally with people in their hoods and all that, but it was a gathering, like a picnic, and families were there. So we stood along the other side of the road with signs, and then Pete and Art both decided that they would go over across the road and talk with some of the Klan's people. And so they went over and got into conversations. Nobody was hit. No, you know, there was nothing like that. But it was Pete and Art both just did a lot of listening. And then asking pointed questions, you know, leading questions to try to challenge them in some way, but not in a...
So this was the summer of 1979. I was hosting a long-range planning meeting for the Federation of Ohio River Co-ops over in Washington County at a community where I lived over there. And Pete saw a flyer for this meeting. Pete, who was from an earlier generation than ours, joined right in, both in the meeting and the process development and in the sessions. He was really there with us. When he left Saturday evening, he stopped and shared with us some really fine words of praise and encouragement for our efforts. The way he built relationships with everyone, and encouraged engagement. But I also saw a deeper pattern, a pattern of a man engaged in a lifelong quest to grow beyond his early socialization as a man in our society. Which we all struggle with. A quest to love and be loved, to feel deeply and to share those feelings. A quest to be a whole human being. And before his passing, I think he achieved that wholeness.
I'm Kat. I met Pete Hill through Peace and Justice organizing, and I had the opportunity in 2004 to interview him for a life history project, and I wrote it. I'd love to share it with all of you at some point. I titled this paper, Lessons in Power, A Life History of Pete Hill. He told me our interviews felt like therapy. He enjoyed the attention as he regaled, engaged, joked, and asked questions. He was a witty, charming, and natural storyteller. I transcribed from the interviews. He told me about what it was like to go to a progressive school. In progressive schools, there was a lot of doing rather than just sitting in rows, listening. I think there was a lot of individual attention. And there was an expectation that the teacher would be able to help bring me out and engage me with what was happening. It was a small-scale, private school. My parents didn't have much. It's amazing that they could spend any of it on my schooling. He continued in progressive education even through college. He went to Black Mountain College, which was a progressive college in North Carolina. In his youth, Pete frequently got into trouble. He was arrested once for playing in a fish pond. He made a really big mess. He quit school in 3rd or 4th grade, returned, and then quit again the 2nd year of high school. He said, "I just hated it. I wasn't into contact sports or competitive sports. I was interested in the ocean and fish and abalone and surfing, and then the hills behind, exploring as far as we could go." They chased bulls on cattle ranches and drove 100 miles per hour up to San Francisco in Gene's car. They went down to Mexico and were kicked out of dance clubs for dancing with Mexican women. When he was drafted at the age of 20, he really struggled because he wanted to be a conscientious objector, but he felt like he might be seen as a coward, and so he willingly accepted the draft. But he talked about how when he arrived in New Guinea, he took off for a week. He didn't want to be in the military. And he said, "When I was a kid, I went to the American Museum of Natural History in New York. I have a clear memory of the dioramas of primitive people there. Here'd be a little grass something or other and a fire over here and somebody coming in with an animal they had gotten. I read romances of the South Pacific, Nordhoff and Hall, Mutiny on the Bounty, Men Against the Sea. You know what my abiding fantasy and dream and urge was? It was to get on the other side of that glass. So then I got to New Guinea. And this was it. This was the closest that I could get to being in the diorama. I mean, here was this shitty military, but I explored the whole island. I spent a week just going around and I saw crocodiles and primeval forest, and there was an abandoned village, probably abandoned because of the war. And here were these little native huts with thatched roofs and raised floors because it was in a floodplain. There were fish nets made out of coconut husk fiber, correa fiber, and pounders and other artifacts. Here was the whole goddamn other side of the diorama wall, and I was in it, free to do whatever I pleased. So then they went from New Guinea up through Micronesia, Palau, the Admiralty Islands, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Japan. Pete arrived in Japan a month after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the firebombing of Tokyo. He described seeing cities that were flat as pancakes, with rubble. It was just ceramic roof tiles covering piles of smoldering ashes and rubble. He said Japan was firebombed back to the pre-Stone Age. But the thing that really impressed him were the way that they were received by the Japanese people. The thing that impressed me was as soon as we got there, we made a combat landing. We had our rifles, you know, and everything went just the way it had earlier in the Pacific. Except there was a force of some 300 Japanese men sitting around in a mass waiting for us to arrive. They'd been arranged to be there to pick up the stuff that we usually carried to shore. They carried our stuff to shore for us. They were there as our porters. And every Japanese I met was obsequiously polite, bowed and scraped and did everything he could to help us. So the thing that amazed me about going to Japan was that here are these people who are sworn enemies. If I landed by parachute or whatever during the war, I'm sure they would have attacked me. But here, just after landing, just after the war was ended, I was treated as an honored guest. So this amazing hospitality and evident friendship, appreciation, and so on, how can that be? How can people be that way? This is not our history. We're full of revenge and anger and fury. Ours is less disciplined and less programmed. So I tell these stories because I think this says a lot about why Pete became such an activist and committed to peace and nonviolence and anti-racism and anti-nuclear activities. He really examined his privilege and his power in the world as a white male American soldier. And the way that he was treated on the other side of the planet really revealed to him a lot about other cultures. He went on to live in Micronesia for 24 years. He described it as, this very privileged lifestyle that you see, this is how people are in Iraq now. This is how people are wherever Americans have expatriate communities all around the world. And he rejected that. He said, I wanted to live in the village. I wanted to hang out with the local people. It was not my bag. We were progressive. I remember having some fights about that, those kinds of relations with other people in the administration. They didn't want me to live the way that I lived. They wanted me gone or conforming. Becoming so involved after he retired from the colonial administration in Micronesia, he came back to the US and decided to devote the rest of his life to sustainable development, community organizing, peace and justice. He told me as he aged that he was starting to develop health problems, that this was slowing him down. And he described aging like colonialism. He said he felt like his body was being colonized by doctors and medicine. He said he planned not to passively exit this life, but he hoped he could kick the bucket. He saw death as an interruption of the many projects that he still has to complete. And I just want to say bon voyage to our friend Pete, and also much love and light to all of you who know him, and I'm so glad that you're all here. Thank you.
Okay, I know 5 things about Mr. Jack Wright. He's from Virginia, down on fracking, he's down on strip mining, he's up for broadband, and he's going to sing us some songs.
We moved here in '85. I met Pete in about '89. We got to be friends, and the first time I ever came out here, I was about 65%. I needed some help. And so Pete sat with me all afternoon. And when I left, I was back up to about 97%. I think this song, some of you may know it, Sweet Winds Blowing. I can feel the sweet winds blowing through the valleys and the hills. I can feel the sweet wind blowing as I go, as I go. I can feel the sweet winds blowing through the valleys and the hills. Our pilgrim has gone home, bless his soul, bless his soul. I can see the morning breaking through the valleys and the hills. I can see the morning breaking as I go, as I go. I can see the morning breaking through the valleys and the hills. And the pilgrim has gone home, bless his soul, bless his soul. I can feel the touch of heaven in the valleys and hills. I can feel the touch of heaven as I go, as I go. I can feel a touch of heaven through the valleys and the hills. Our pilgrim has gone home, bless his soul, bless his soul. I can feel the touch of heaven through the valleys and the hills. I can feel the touch of heaven as I go, as I go. I can feel a touch of heaven through the valleys and the hills. Our pilgrim has gone home, bless his soul, bless his soul. I can feel the people stirring through the valleys and the hills. I can feel the people stirring as I go, as I go. I can feel the people stirring through the valleys and the hills. Our pilgrim has gone home, bless his soul, bless his soul. Thank you. I haven't sung that song in about 35 years till today. And, well, when Marty called me, we'll pick it up here and sing one that Pete liked to hear. Come all you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union is coming here to dwell. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? My daddy was a miner, and I'm a miner's son. I'll stick with the Union till every battle's won. Which side are you on? 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 They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You're either in the Union or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be a lousy scab, or will you be a man? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Don't scab for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks ain't got a chance unless we organize. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Come on, you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Well, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Thank you. Now I'll sing just a short piece that you might know. Bright morning stars are rising. I'll just do the first verse, if I can find the right key for me. I think that dog's in the key I sing to. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Bright morning stars are rising. Day is a breaking in my soul. Thank you very much, friends.
Yes, yeah. Young people, middle people, old people, lots of people loved Pete. We've heard a lot about Pete's activism, his progressive leadership, and stories about his past that I didn't know, and it's a shame that I have to wait until today to hear some of these things. But boy, could he repair a broken pipe. So Pete was a multi-talented person, and one of his talents was fixing stuff, duct taping stuff, wrapping inner tubes around stuff, figuring out what stuff he had around that wasn't quite the stuff he needed to fix the stuff that was broken, but it was good enough, and he made it happen. And this place, from a little pumping setup down in the creek to a buried cistern to underground infrastructure to all these houses, to my house, to other houses in the community. There's a lot of stuff that Peter was a part of. That was an accidental benefit of being around Pete. And so we were building our house after living here in Currents. We built our house nearby. And so there's always something that I needed from the garage. And oftentimes it'd be at 5 o'clock and I'd tell Michelle, I'll be right back. I'm going to go check with Pete and see if I can get a pipe fitting or something like that. And she would call or just give up on me, and 9:30 would roll around and I'd get back, and Pete would have had a cuppy of warm beer and would have shared some with me, and we'd sit and start talking about travels and overseas and politics and everything else. And there's so many people in this world, and Athens is a place with lots of these kinds of people that really touch you, and they're really special people, exceptional people. And I can count probably 10, exceptional people that have become part of me and made me who I am. And Pete Hill is definitely one of the influences in my life and so many other lives. Much more than activism and co-ops and childcare and justice, just by interacting with people and doing regular stuff with them, touching them, and being a big, big person. So thank you and goodbye to Pete. Thank you, everybody.
My name is Amariah, and I have a memory that was kind of toward the end. I stand vigil on Monday from 11:30 to 12:30 with several people who are here. And there was one week when Marty was able to bring him, and he came and he sat in a folding chair and was just really glad to be there, and had a sign. And I had a sign about racism, and something had happened recently. And so as people would walk by, I wouldn't want them to just walk by. I'd kind of like turn my sign and try and get their attention, or turn my sign like this. And mostly I was ignored. And Pete finally looks at me, he says, "Why don't you just trip them?" So, I was a pacifist, but if something needed to happen, he could suggest it.
I lived at Currents in 2000 for a couple of years around here, and got to know Pete and Marty better then, and have stayed in touch. And I miss Pete for so many reasons. One of my quick memory is when we were fighting the Walmarts, and Pete said, come on. He enlisted me to help him build a nature path. Maybe others were part of that, making signs of what was already there. I'll never forget his creativity. I want to read 2 poems that I wrote about Pete, and Pete was kind of a walking poem, and I'm a little ashamed that I don't have like 100,000 Pete poems, but maybe you have some of your own. Pete tells me things. The tomato tree in his front yard, for example, and the pond we'll dig at the top of the hill, despite the lack of water. The sunset breaks in office tower windows, and we're drinking red wine from plastic hospital cups. When he coughs, the stitches in his chest pull loose. He tells me there was a shark once in Micronesia. He slit its belly and watched it swim away without a heart. I never knew if Pete was telling the truth. Ever. Never knew. Still don't know. one other, I'm going to make this kid-friendly. Change a little word in here. When the giraffes come. The last days of July, we walk past an oak struck by lightning, bark blown hundreds of feet above the creek and hanging rocks. And Pete asks, will you put all of this in a poem? And will I include the part about the giraffes taking over the continent? And the elephants mating like it's a community event? At breakfast, beneath the dazzle of locust shells tied by string above the kitchen table, he says, when the giraffes come, we'll sneak to the fields and cut the wire so they can come and go as they please.
That's all right. Pete and I were buddies for almost 30 years, and we just had a lot of fun together. Pete was one of the funniest guys I ever knew. He was just funny as hell. That was one of the things that really drew us together. We both really enjoyed just goofing off. And he loved a good practical joke, and he even on his own in private in solitude, you know, he was having a good time and laughing at things. And I remember coming to visit one time, and it was late summer, and the Queen Anne's lace was in full bloom. Beautiful Queen Anne's lace, ivory flowers. And I came driving up, I saw a blue Queen Anne's lace over here, and then a little further on a pink one, and then over here a couple more blue ones. And then I pulled up to the garage, and here's Pete with the spray paint. All on his own, you know, unsupervised. I just loved him to death. I met him, we were involved in a men's group here. That's how I first encountered Pete. Before the house was built, before Marty and Pete built their house here, they lived at the old house. There was a men's group there, and that's where I first started getting involved with Pete. Like I said, we became good pals, and I learned a lot from him over the years, real practical stuff. He taught me how to properly develop a spring over at our homestead where Elise and I live, and that spring today continues to flow because I followed Pete's instructions very precisely. He taught me how to wire our house when we built the house in '91. He taught me, I could go on and on, all the practical skills and things that I learned from Pete, but the really most important, kind of most precious stuff I learned from Pete was of another order. In 1990, Wendell Berry, a writer, published a book of essays titled, What Are People For? And, I bought that book, and I never made it through the whole book. I read a few of the essays, but I always loved the title, What Are People For? And I think it's a great title, and I think it's a wonderful question. And I never discussed it with Pete. I never did ask him, you know, what he actually thought people were for. And I think that probably if I had, he would have said something silly like, people are for squeezing, or, you know, something like that. So these last few years, I would come over here on Fridays usually. Up until Pete wasn't able to get out at all. I would take him out to dinner. We would go up to Go-Go Burrito up in Trimble. It's a great place. You eat outdoors. It's up at the corner of 329 and 13 right there at Trimble. And there's a little patio, and it's real kitschy. And it's a fun place, and all the local people and people from all over will come and sit out in the patio and eat. And it was a great place to take Pete because, you know how Pete was, the whole world was family to Pete. And there was no separate dinner table. We were all at one table, eating together, you know, and so he would get up and go and start talking to people and stuff. But I just remember this one sweet little memory. It wasn't a big deal, but it was the last time we went there, and this was last summer. I helped him out of the car, and it took a while because he had to stop right in the parking lot and take a piss in front of the whole world, and it took a long time. And he had stopped, I think, at this time. Somewhere along the way, he quit cutting his hair. He just didn't see a need for it anymore. So his hair was getting long, and the beard was getting long. He looked like he looked like a wizard, you know, and he had a stick. And so we pulled up at one of these little tables, and we got our food, and there were some families there, and he was chatting it up, and there was a boy, probably 10 or 12, And Pete just suddenly said, "Come over here and shake my hand." And this boy just delightedly, without hesitating, it was beautiful. He just jumped up and he just went right over and shook Pete's hand. It was a beautiful thing. It was kind of simple, but you know, I've been thinking about it lately, and it was really, Pete was, in religious terms, you know, spiritual terms, he was like blessing the boy, and the boy was blessing him back, really, is what actually happened there, as I saw it now. This is what I have really learned from Pete all these years, is along the lines of what are people for, you know, and I never did ask him, but based on my observations, and I'm continuing to learn this and relearn this, what Pete Hill taught me is what people are for loving and enjoying and forgiving. Amen. Thank you.
Love, 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 love. People, we are made of love. Love each other as ourselves, for we are love. Beautiful. People, we are made of love. Love each other as ourselves, for we are love.
Did you have one? Well, only one time until if there's any left, then you could do that. Because lots of people want to help. But you probably can do it again at the end.
I think we're going to leave the line yeah, okay.
In my foot, no, it's too big. Guys, I'm trying to balance. Mama, this is the nose.
He's an honorary in-law.
Okay. And Nana?
You can imagine. Hey, Autumn, you want to help scatter these a little? Here, thanks.
Okay, guys, don't
People are welcome to go on down afterwards. unless you just want to linger.
People would draw names. This one year, whoever got Pete's name gave him those underpants. And he said, I want to try them on. He left the room, walked back into the room, stark naked with those on his head.
I think I almost could remember that, but I'm not sure.
I remember. It was in the pouch.
In the pouch, yeah. I remember
that sensual room.
Yeah.
I forgot to tell you, I'm Alexa Ross. Nan reminded me. And where is this wonderful thrift shop benefiting animals? It's at the end of Columbus Road in a little strip mall just past the gas station there. And if it's open, go in there. They have so many lovely treasures, and you're helping the wild animal population. Or our little friends get neutered, so they're not so terribly many of them suffering. Sally?
And thank you, Alexa, for having me on your show. I'm here today because it's my birthday. And when I was younger, I used to think that my birthday was the day I got to do what I wanted to do. And now that I'm older, I've realized that it's the day I get to do what my mother wants me to do. So I'm here on the show for my mom, Nan Michael. She loves cable access and Athens community and Kaleidoscope very much, and she loves you, Alexa. And so I'm here because she wants me to be here and made me. So I love you, Mom, and I love Athens, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Bye.